What's going on, everybody? Well, if you have not been following the channel here recently, or if you're finding me for the first time, welcome. I have been talking about the PlayStation VR2 hardware over the past couple of weeks. I've been streaming Resident Evil Village. I just did my first impressions review of the actual headset and the VR2 Sense controllers. So please, if you're interested in checking out my thoughts on specifically the hardware, check that video out. But as of today, it is time to talk about all of the PlayStation VR2 games that I have played thus far and rank them from worst to best. And I have played 11 of the games that are out right now. There's around 25 of them. Some of them are just ports from PSVR. Some of them are a VR mode for an existing PS5 game. And many of them are games created for the PlayStation VR2. Essentially what I did the night that I got my PlayStation VR2 was that I went online and looked at a bunch of different lists of people that actually got to check this thing out early and see what video games everybody was saying was the best showcase as well as the most fun for the VR headset. And as well as just going through the store and picking out a couple ones that I was personally interested in, and I landed with the 11 that I have. The only game that I really wanted to check out that did not make this list was Gran Turismo 7, and unfortunately I just can't find a copy of it that is not $70, even though it's almost a year old, and I'm not somebody that's going to be playing that game very often because I'm not a big racing person. I just didn't have any way to justify a $70 purchase just to test the game out, although I've heard through many people that's one of the best showcases of this headset. So unfortunately, that won't be part of the 11. It also needs to be said that I played every single one of these in a seated position. There are two of them that I tried to play in a standing position. I have a little bit of experience with that I'll talk about, but for the most part, all of these were played in a seated position. That shouldn't matter, but for some of them, it absolutely will. So starting off at 11 for me is honestly the only game that I purchased that I just did not care for whatsoever, and it's just my own personal taste, and that is going to be Kayak VR Mirage. And this is a tech demo to the T. This is the first thing that I played on the PlayStation VR headset. I had my little computer chair downstairs, and essentially it is a kayak simulator where you have the two VR Sense controllers and you just kind of mimic the kayak motions, and you go through all of these rendered environments, these different areas of the world. You have different night and day settings, and so it's just like this relaxing little trek through the water, and you get to see this nature visuals essentially, which is a cool tech demo to show the visual fidelity of this headset. But it's extremely boring. That's all you really do. You can race to go from one end to the other to try to beat your best times. You can just stroll along if you want a relaxing kind of view of what they were able to render. But I played maybe 30 minutes of this, and I was just extremely bored and ready to play something else. I did eventually go back to it after I had gotten about a week and a half of experience with the headset to see if I would enjoy it more, and it's just not for me. I'm not here to play tech demos, and that's exactly what this is. Number 10 is a game that, to be completely fair, I have not given enough time to it to really dive into whether it gets better or it gets significantly more exciting, but it's just not exactly a puzzle game that is for me, and that is the Last Clockwinder. And essentially what you have here is kind of a robot clone simulator to where you have all these little workers and they will mimic whatever motion you do. So if you need them to pull a lever continuously, you hold a button, you pull the lever, one of them comes up, and that's now their job. And then you have somebody else that you want to like toss something, and you basically have these little Rube Goldberg machines that you have to get some kind of a goal met by having all these little robots do certain little functionality jobs and working together to get that goal made, whether it's transferring something from one end of the room to the other, or it's opening up a gate or solving some kind of a puzzle. And so it's an interesting concept, and I'm sure as you go through the game, they get more intricate and they get more interesting and a little bit more brain teasing, and I would enjoy that side of it more. The first 2 hours of this game was a little rough for me to get through. It just really tested my patience. There's not really enough guidance on what you're actually supposed to do. Some people like that. Some people like having no instructions whatsoever and you just have to figure it out and sink or swim. I like that sometimes. Sometimes it's frustrating, especially when you're in a VR environment that's already a little physically taxing. So while if you're all about puzzle games, you will probably enjoy this more than I did, and I do plan on eventually going back and trying to explore the game more, and it could absolutely move up the list once I do that. As of right now, it was the one that I was least excited, aside from Kayak VR, to go back and give more time to. Number 9 might surprise some people if you know my taste in video games and movies, but the Dark Pictures Switchback did not impress me whatsoever. This is essentially Until Dawn Rush of Blood, but not nearly as good. And Rush of Blood was one of my favorite games on the original PSVR. I actually like that more than Until Dawn. That's kind of a hot take, but this is basically a rail shooter. You are in kind of like a funhouse kart ride, and you ride through little roller coaster areas, and you have things that jump out at you. You have targets that you have to shoot. You have actual monsters and zombies that you have to shoot. And I gave this game a good 2 hours of attention. I got through like 2 or 3 levels, and I was just never really enjoying it. First of all, the actual roller coaster segments, I have a strong stomach, and I have a lot of tolerance for VR, to where I've played sometimes 3-4 hours in one sitting and not really needed to take a break. And this made me physically ill quick. Like even just the very first one where you drop down and do like a little hill, it just really taxes your motion sickness tolerance. And so that's one hit against it, because that's constantly happening throughout every single level. Number 2 is that this game is only focused on startling you. And I like atmosphere. I like having sound design and impending doom, and having something like running towards me from a distance or walking towards me where there's a bit of a ticking clock element to it. This game is only focused on having things jump out to the left and jump out to the right and jump out in front of you, for the most part, to develop its scares. And while it's effective, while you will certainly scream and go, "Oh shit," and then just start blasting at everything, I don't prefer to be startled. I prefer to be actually scared, and there is a difference. So if you enjoyed Until Dawn Rush of Blood, I would say to give this a shot. You might like it as much. You might like it even more than Rush of Blood, but for me, Rush of Blood was absolutely the better experience than this in almost every single way. Number 8 is going to be Jurassic World Aftermath, and this was a big bummer. This was actually the second game that I played. As soon as I got bored with Kayak, I turned this on. And while it didn't surprise me, because I kind of got a hint of it in the poster whenever I bought this game, I think the cell shading art direction kind of took away from this for me, because if it looked more realistic like the actual Jurassic World and Jurassic Park movies, I probably would have been more invested in it. But I don't really get all that tense for cartoon looking dinosaurs, and so the art direction took quite a bit away from this for me. Other than that, I just didn't think that the gameplay was all that interesting. It was, again, felt like a tech demo where you can crouch, you can hide underneath tables, you can use things to open doors, and there's just segments kind of like Alien Isolation, where a raptor comes into the room that you're in, and you just have to stay hidden until it turns around, and then you move to another table. And that's interesting at first, but when that's the main gameplay mechanic over and over again, is just don't get seen by the dinosaur, that wears out its welcome pretty quick. I wish they would have done something a little more dynamic with that. Even the first encounter you have with the T-Rex, just because it's cell shaded and it's more of a cutscene than anything else, not something you're actually physically avoiding, I just didn't feel the tension or the excitement that I felt like I should have with this. And again, I haven't gotten far into the game. It might get better as it goes along, but I did not have the time or the ability to donate 8 to 10 hours of my time for every single one of these to give it the most fair review. So my first impressions of what I did give to Jurassic Park Aftermath lands it right here. Number 7 is going to be Puzzling Places, and this is a very relaxing game for those that like jigsaw puzzles. Essentially, it is a 3D jigsaw puzzle. The first one I did was like a haunted house, to where you get this display of what the thing is supposed to look like, and there's pictures and different angles around you that you can use for reference. And then there's like 25 pieces, and you can probably increase the amount of pieces that are off, just kind of floating in the air, and you use the little VR Sense controllers to kind of manipulate the 3D images and put together these little 3D houses or 3D forests and things like that together to solve this little puzzle. And I thought it was really enjoyable. It's not something that I would go to for an exciting experience, but if I just want to relax for half an hour and do some little 3D puzzles, I found it enjoyable. So it's simple. It's something that is definitely one note. It's just solving puzzles, But if you're in the mood for that, or if you're somebody that likes that, I think they do it well. Number 6 is going to be Moss. And to be fair, I only played book 1. There is book 2 of this, and I don't know how different it is. I don't know if things are ramped up or if things are a different tonal shift, but I only played the first half of this game. And I have to give a shout out as well to the developers, because they actually gave me a review code for this to be able to check it out. So thank you so much. And this is an interesting game because you kind of play with 2 different angles. You are essentially like this guardian that is watching over this little mouse, and each little level is just a segment of that environment, to where with one hand you control the mouse and where the mouse goes and whether they jump or climb certain things. There's even like some boss battles and little enemies that will come up you have to actually attack with a sword. And at the same time, you use the other hand to kind of interact with the environment. So if you have a giant gap and there's a little block, you can pull the block and then control the mouse to go across that gap, and things get a little more complicated and intricate from there. So it's like an action puzzle solving game. I think it's very charming. I think the art direction of it is also really cool, because everything that's just a part of your little puzzle section that you're focusing on is in complete color. Everything else is kind of muted in black and white in the background. And so if you look around, you can see like gazelles and deers and other animals in the forest just kind of obscured in the background doing their thing while you're focused on this. Thought that was a neat detail. But it's a game that, again, feels a little more like a tech demo than something that is something I would be compelled to sit there and actually dump 8 to 10 hours into. It's just like, let me reach and grab this block. Let me reach and grab this. Let me open the door for you. And it's a very simple mechanic. It's done well. And like I said, it is charming. And there are some people that they're going to love that type of thing, that kind of old school, kind of cutesy platformer type approach. But again, I'm still kind of in the realm of things that feel more like just a tech demo that's showcased in VR versus an actual game that just happens to be VR. Coming in at my top 5, all of these games are the ones that I would highly recommend. All the ones below this are ones that I was mixed on or kind of interested in, or, you know, the Kayak VR, that I just didn't like whatsoever. But these top 5 I have had a really good time with through varying degrees. And number 5 for me is going to be Horizon Call of the Mountain. Now, this is one that might disappoint people that it's this low, because it is the premier game. It is the one that they kind of bundled and advertised and built to be the tech demo, the big showcase for the PS VR2. And I am a fan of the 2 Horizon games. Story-wise and character-wise, it's not as strong as the gameplay and the world building to me, but I like them. And so I was excited to play this. And unfortunately, I think they did kind of a weak job at actually advertising what this game is. It is not an action adventure. It is not a thing where you're basically playing Horizon, but in VR. It's a climbing demo. There is action in it. There is fight sequences in it. There is like these little arena battles where you get to actually shoot arrows and do that Horizon fighting mechanic that you have in the previous 2 games, but they're few and far between. Most of it is just climbing. Most of it is just traversal. And that kind of got tired for me very quickly, to where I still have not finished this game. I've got about 3-4 hours into it. From what I've heard, I got about 4 more hours to go before the end of it. I will finish it. But yeah, it's essentially you climbing ropes and climbing the sides of mountain, and eventually getting like pickaxes where you can go up the sides of walls and snow-covered mountains. And occasionally you have a Horizon beast come out, one of the little robot dinosaurs, and you have a little arena battle. But even the arena battles to me are very repetitive, because the motion of actually shooting these things, it's a bow and arrow, so you have, you know, depending on left or right-handed, you have the bow out and you're holding it with one hand, and you're constantly just doing this, grabbing arrows and shooting it, and then you'll dodge, and then you're doing this, and man, do you get tired doing that by the time you get done with one of these battles. Like, you're sitting there like, fuck, how many more fucking arrows? Visually, it's beautiful. It really showcases the fidelity of the PSVR 2, that more than double the resolution of PSVR, the eye tracking mechanics that are in here. This is the only game that has really utilized it well, where you can actually navigate menus, and you can kind of tell when the VR headset is focusing in on what you're focusing in on, and the other stuff isn't as highly rendered, which is the whole point of the eye tracking. So there is that side of it. As a showcase for the hardware, the game does its job. As an actual game that I want to sit down and play and recommend to others and say, hey, you should spend full price on this, not quite. Number 4 is going to be Zombieland Headshot Fever Reloaded. So I believe this is a game that came out for the original PSVR, hence the Reloaded title. So this is one that you can kind of get over that little backwards compatibility hump that I talked about in my hardware review. But this is a rail shooter with zombies, and it has that Zombieland fever, that Zombieland humor to it, that Zombieland style, and I have had a lot of fun with this one. It's very fast paced. Like, the levels are only a minute and a half long, so it's easy to just kind of run through a couple of levels if you just want to dive into this. It's not like long, exhausting levels like I felt Switchback VR was. So you essentially are this newcomer that comes around the characters of the movie Zombieland, and they teach you the rules just like the movies about double tap. And so you get these little rail shooters to where you're going room to room, like old school arcade games like House of the Dead, and you'll have 3 or 4 zombies, and you got to take care of them before they get to you, and then you move on to the next room. But it's very fast paced, and it's very fun. If you shoot a zombie twice in the head, double tap, then time slows down, so you'll get a chance to pop off a couple more shots while zombies are kind of suspended. There are a lot of upgrades and different weapons that you can get. You can revisit levels and get certain challenges. There might be specific things that you have to shoot, like a hat or, a gas tank, to get a bonus there. And so there's a lot of replay value in this for me. And it's also one of the shooters that, just because the actual levels are only a minute to a minute and a half long, that I feel like you really don't get exhausted with it very much. Like, I can jump in, play a couple of levels, have a blast with it, and then go do something else or play a different game, and I'm always excited to go back to Zombieland. So I really enjoyed this one. If you like shooters, this is one of the best ones available right now. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Pistol Whip, and this is another game that was available on PSVR, but they have the upgraded version for PSVR2, and this is essentially a game where if you've ever wanted to feel like John Wick, this is what you want to check out. It is a rail shooter, but it also is kind of like Beat Saber, to where they have songs going on, and you get bonus points if you kill the enemies kind of within the beat of the song. You'll have enemies you have to shoot. You'll have enemies that you have to physically pistol whip. You'll also have little obstacles that you have to dodge left and right. And it's just a really enjoyable game. Like, I found myself, especially if you put like the little stereo headset in and you turn the volume up really loud, to where you're sitting there and I'm getting in the beat of it. And all of a sudden I'm killing motherfuckers to the beat, and I was having a really good time. Like, oonch, oonch, oonch. There's 2 separate campaigns. There's one that so far you only use one gun, that's more of like a futuristic type of like sci-fi shooter. There's also one where you dual wield, and it's more of a Western, and I've enjoyed the Western one more thus far. But you have 2 different campaigns, you have customizable levels, you have like 20-25 different songs, and so there's a lot of content here for your money. And this is only like a $30 game, $25 game for me. I did play this predominantly in a seated position, and as I said in my hardware review, this is one of the games that I don't think functions as well as a seated game. There is actually obstacles you cannot physically dodge if you're in a seated position. I think that's a little bit silly. But I did play this one in a standing position as well. And even though I was a little nervous with, the tether there, whether or not I was going to trip over it, it's a really fun game to play standing, because as long as you have the room for it, you can just go all over the place and dodge certain things and bash people, and you have to dodge the bullet. So if they get a shot off before you kill them, the bullet kind of comes towards you in bullet time. And so you have to either lean or duck or go to the left or the right. And so it's a physically demanding game, but it's a lot of fun. Coming in at number 2 is the game that I have been the most addicted to by a landslide, and that is Townsman VR. Now, I'm somebody that I really enjoy these God mode games like SimCity and Roller Coaster Tycoon and the Jurassic Park Evolution games, to where you're essentially just putting together towns and giving people jobs and watching the world kind of unfold, and there's certain objectives that you have to get and certain obstacles you have to hit. And that is essentially what this is, but you physically are God. You have these 2 hands, and so you can drag people, you can drag buildings, you can drag resources. And so it starts off more small scale, it gets more and more expanded as you go along, and there's a lot of variety in the objectives and the different things that you have to go. There's even a point where you have to physically battle other people, and so you'll have to build a little army and actually go and use catapults and take over certain pieces. So there's a nice variety there, not just building and town management. But even just the building and town management stuff I thought was a lot of fun, where you have people that are your builders, people that are your fishermen or hunters or cooks, or all these different roles that all function to get certain objectives done or to get certain resources built. And I was just addicted to this damn thing. 2 or 3 hours would go by and I'm like, fuck, I feel like I've been sitting here for 20 minutes. I'm just losing time with how much fun I've had with this. It does get a little exhausting in the back third or so, because every single time you beat an island, you go to another island and essentially start from scratch. And so the first 2/3 to 3/4 of your experience on that island is essentially just rebuilding everything that you just did in the last one, and then they expand it by giving you some new buildings or some new roles or an enemy you have to defeat. And so there's always something different in the next island, but if you're not somebody that really enjoys that experience, it will probably wear you thin with how many times you achieve this little town and get everything working like clockwork, and then you go to the next island and you start from scratch and you're just rebuilding everything you just did, which does take some time. So I do really enjoy these types of games, so it didn't bug me as much, but I could see some people getting really exhausted with the monotony by the end of it, but I had a blast with it. This is only one of 2 games that I beat all the way to the end and was not ready to play anything else until I finished it. But by a landslide, by a country mile, the #1 game for me is easily Resident Evil Village. And it's not just because I love survival horror games, it's not just because Resident Evil is my favorite video game franchise, it's because this is the only game right now that is available on this headset that is a full-fledged game. It's just a VR mode that they added, that you play through the entire game, the entire storyline, the entire campaign, now in a VR mode. But previous to that, it was already a fully developed game with many different chapters, different enemies, different gameplay styles, even the side stuff like mercenaries and everything. And so, to me, this is what I want to see out of the PSVR 2. I want to see more games like this, to where this is something I would want to sit down and play, even if it was not VR. If I was just using a controller and going through it, this is something I would drop my money on. Not just something that's like, hey, this is something interesting to do because it's in 3D and VR. Village was already a fantastic game before that. The only disappointment that I have is that I've already beaten and played this game so many times that all of the genuinely frightening moments in this game that would have been intense in VR, I was already numb to, and I already knew things were going to jump out. I already knew where certain things were going to happen. Whereas when I played Biohazard, and I played through that entire game for the first time in VR, the entirety of that campaign, that to date is still the scariest video game experience I've ever had. Village would have easily topped that if I was able to experience the game for the first time in VR. So if you haven't played the game yet, I envy you. But even as somebody that knows this game like the back of my damn hand, I loved playing it in VR, and I do think it is the definitive way to play it. I love the way that you have the different functionality to where you have jacket pockets that holds like your grenades and extra weapons and flashlights and mines, and then you also have different areas on your body where you'll have like the shotgun down here and you'll have a sniper rifle down here, and the way that you have different reloading mechanics depending on every gun. Like the pistol, you just exit the clip, put the new clip in and cock it. The shotgun, you have to push all the bullets in and then cock it. The sniper rifle, you have to flip it on its side and put everything in and then pull the thing back. Like every gun, you have to know physically how you would reload that in real life and do all of that in real time while you're fighting off werewolves and all the other shit that's in this. And I loved all of that. I also think the tension is significantly higher in certain segments, especially in the werewolf segments, to where they get close to you and you are like panicking whenever you are unloading on them and they're still getting closer, or you have to reload your weapon and you're just like, oh, you're just trying to grasp at anything to keep them off of you. And there's certain segments even in boss battles, like with Lady Demetresque, where she's coming at you and you're trying to like navigate around her, and the tension is much higher in VR than it ever was in just first person mode in the regular version of the game. I also think that, they do a really good job with certain elements of this and the interactivity, like pulling switches and physically putting things together for puzzles, and even just the item inventory management, where you like pull things with VR and move things physically from one section to the other to kind of fit everything into your little attaché case. All the elements that were already awesome in the game, almost all of them are better in VR. The only thing that's not is that some cutscenes are relegated to just basically looking at a TV screen, and I just skipped those because that annoyed me. There was also some segments to where it's not necessarily a cutscene, but it's not a playable section to where, like, say, Lady Dimitrescu grabs you and throws you, to where you'll see like your detached arms go into some weird spots because the cutscenes were never really designed to be something where you can physically look in any direction you want. It was supposed to be like one continuous experience to where it's basically a cutscene. And so those segments got a little bit weird, where you could, even in some where there's a character off to the side that you're not supposed to see until they come into view for the cutscene for an intended scare or an intended surprise. And during the cutscene, you can literally look over here and just see the character animation just kind of like standing off to the side until the segment where the code of the game tells them to walk in. So there is a little bit of a weird nature to it. It never broke the game for me whatsoever, but it was funny to watch. But I absolutely loved playing this in VR. The other thing that was annoying, although it did make the intensity of it more because I had to start from scratch, is that when you play in VR mode, your save files from the non-VR mode does not apply. So even though I've beaten this game 7 or 8 times, unlocked pretty much everything, have everything upgraded, have all these different weapons, you cannot play with anything you have unlocked. You have to literally start from scratch. So part of that was enjoyable because it just caused more tension where I only have a pistol and I have to remember where all these different treasures are and where these different weapons are and start from scratch. There was also a bit of an annoyance there to where I want to play with all the shit that I've unlocked. I don't want to have to unlock all of that again. Like if I wanted to jump in now and play it a second time in VR, I still could not have all those things that I unlocked. And that was a little annoying. But even with those minor little gripes, this was a fantastic VR experience. This was easily the best game that I played out of the PSVR lineup so far. And this is the type of experience I want them to continue to deliver to justify the purchase of a $600 headset. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for a playlist of my 2023 game reviews. And I'm also going to put my hardware review up here of the PSVR for you to check out. Please like and share and hit that subscribe button. And as always, remember, the Game Chamber is Commander Shepard's favorite channel on the YouTubes.